So, hello everyone, and welcome to On Fire for Life. It's always my pleasure to be part of this show. I have the great opportunity of meeting so many luminaries and amazing people, none other than today, of course, with Paul Selig. We are so fortunate to have him. He had an incident in his life occur that led him to become a clairvoyant in 1987. He is a mover and a shaker. I can tell you that because so many of you know now I live in Santa Barbara. When he was here, there was a line all the way down the sidewalk waiting to hear Paul Selig. Paul, welcome to the show today. Thank you for saying yes. I admire you and your work, and thank you for being here.
It's very kind. Thanks. I'm glad to be here.
So, tell us about your life. I know that we were talking earlier before the show started that with the show being On Fire for Life, that's one thing that you definitely support is I know how I have sensed the great humility you carry. And I have sensed that unlike a lot of people in your field, you keep your ego intact. I sense that. And that being said, I do feel you are a strong bridge or a window that supports people in being on fire for their own lives or opening their passion to doing the work they came here to do truly as soul beings. But how did all this start with you?
Well, it sure wasn't intended, and none of this is what I thought would happen. That's my little dog in the background, Lily. She'll make an appearance and go to sleep again, I hope.
I love it.
I was in 1987, I was about a year out of graduate school. I had a list of things that I thought I needed to achieve in the world that would make me okay. I got the whole list. I wasn't okay by any stretch of the imagination. And although I'd been raised something of an atheist, I found myself praying for the first time for help. And
Mm.
um, and I heard a voice, and it told me what to do, and I did it, and I cleaned up my act the next day or that very day. I was drinking and drugging and, being self-destructive. And it was such an obvious occurrence and one that I really couldn't refute that I listened. And
Mm.
I found myself on a spiritual path, not even knowing what that was. I thought, I didn't know what a spiritual life was or that one could have one. But I found myself on a path, and I had an experience shortly thereafter where it was an energetic experience. People later said it sounded like a spontaneous Kundalini awakening, but it was energy moving through my body and out through the top of my head. And I started seeing little lights around people, and then I studied a form of energy healing to get a context for that. And I was volunteering at a center. It was the height of the AIDS epidemic, and I was living in New York. And I found that when I had my hands on people's bodies, I began to hear things for them. And once that started getting proven out, I began to channel. And it was a very long path. I was teaching college for most of my adult life, and I was doing this work quietly. I had a group that met in my apartment for 18 years. I wasn't looking to be known for it, and not expecting to make a living doing it. But I kept doing it, and in terms of helping people find their passion, I found this whole thing confounding in
Mm.
every way. And I was very stuck, and that wasn't that long ago, actually, maybe 7 years ago. I was feeling stuck, and I was working with a prayer minister from Agape, and she said, "Well, I'm going to ask your guides what's going on with you and what's going on." And I thought maybe you can get something out of them because I don't do very well listening for myself. And the guides piped in when she asked her question, and they said, "Paul's job is to hold the door open for others."
Mm.
That pissed me off enormously. I thought, well, that's not right. But I realized later, shortly thereafter, because they were dictating a book through me, which is what they do now. The guides I work with, they just dictate entire books that don't need editing. They introduced what they called the upper room, and they said, the doorway is open and you get to come too. Paul, you get to come too. And I got to step through the doorway. And that's been my path, and this is the work that I do now, although I may question it for the rest of my life. It still feels unexpected, although it's been such a part of my life for a very, very long time. I may never understand how it works. I don't think of myself as terribly special. I think of myself as somewhat fortunate. I really needed help and I got it, and I
Hmm.
came in a way that I wouldn't have expected, and it led me on a journey that I don't even know that I thought I could even have. So that's my story, such as it is.
Mm. Well, what is so evident is that you did allow,
Yeah.
I mean, to some people that are out there going, "Oh, I want my purpose and I don't know this," and it's right there, and they refuse or they're unwilling. And I just acknowledge that about you is because you allowed it and have allowed yourself to be the download, if you will, of the guides and the spirits. And in curiosity, do you happen to remember, this is a personal reason I'm asking, the time of year in 1987
Yeah,
when you
I know
said,
exactly when it was. It was the harmonic convergence.
mm,
And somebody said to me, people are going to be waking up. And I thought, because I had no idea of anything and I wasn't raised with any religion, and I thought, well, if there is a God or something like a God, and I was beginning to think that perhaps there was, and you asked to be woken up, why would it want to say no? And I went up to the roof of the building that I lived in the night before this event,
mm-hmm,
and I asked to be woken up. And somebody had given me a mantra, somebody gave me a crystal, and I thought you needed the things to wake up, the props I thought were important. But it turned out the mantra was a Kundalini mantra. I didn't even know what Kundalini was. And then all of this stuff started to happen through me. But that was the timing, so it
mm,
was the summer of 87. I was 25 years old.
mm,
And, and then things haven't really been the same. And I still say, maybe I was just hyperventilating up there on that roof. Maybe I'll never really know what happened. But
mm,
I know that it was a tangible experience for me. And at a time in my life when I had enough reserve and skepticism about things that were spiritual, that I think I needed something that was tangible and that I could sort of claim experientially, that wasn't an idea and didn't come from, any organized space.
mm-hmm. I remember the profoundness of harmonic convergence, and I do specifically because it was my birthday. But more importantly, with the harmonic convergence, my boyfriend and I were at Boynton Beach at the time, and we were walking the beach late that night, and I had never had this experience before that a mom turtle came to lay her eggs, and we jumped because it was real dark. There were no lights or anything. It's like, what is that coming out of the ocean? And it was this huge turtle the size of a hood of a car. And I don't think people realize that they're sizable beings. And so she came up, and we really watched, and just as the moon was shining, then you could see there was like tears. And I understand there's reasons for that are not just emotional, but she birthed, she laid all these eggs. And the next day, we walked the same distance to see if there was anything there, still a hole or, whatever. And a little boy was so in tune with the energy there that he had built this huge turtle sandcastle, this huge replica. And he obviously didn't know it, but he was just picking up on that oneness.
Wow.
But my no more drinking, no more drugging was September 23rd, 1987.
Ah,
And so I was like, 87 was
yeah.
a special year for, well, the reason I'm still on the earth, I'm sure.
Mine was April 16th,
Okay.
87, that
Yeah.
date.
Yeah. So a great year for people who survive themselves.
Pretty much.
You know, that's for sure. Well, it I love hearing your story because to me it's living proof, and I know this is more applicable to people listening. It's living proof that you can be in your own way, and still the way can come through if you let it. because I'm hearing like you weren't like mega excited, like what? In the very beginning. I'm going to do what?
Yeah.
Um, but it's so, your story is so pertinent to so many people, because people get into this, maybe they have the background of religiosity, or they have these isms or these paradigms in which they live, and well, I missed that opportunity, or I didn't do that right.
Yeah.
Whereas the real thing is to be open and continue to allow. And you tell us about that, because you're the expert in this way.
I mean, I know about it in reference to what I do in terms of the channeling,
Hmm.
which, as I said, wasn't expected. The only reason I'm known for my work now is because, you know, in 2009, I'd been channeling for some time, and how I channeled changed, as I was developed. And I had just begun lecturing in channel. I've been doing it a long time, but not the way that I do now with lectures. And that came after I quit smoking cigarettes, and suddenly everything opened up at a whole other level. But I had been trying to be a playwright, which I had been when I was younger, and was mostly giving up. I was teaching it and teaching it well. And I got fired from a gig, a writing gig, and I went to bed for 3 days, which is what you do when you get fired
Hmm.
from a gig. And
Yes.
a woman that I knew from my academic life called me and said, Paul, this might be a great time to write your memoir about how you became clairaudient. And I said, well, I'm never going to write again. And I was really clear about that. And my
Hmm.
guides piped in and said, well, we have a book to write. And if you take 2 weeks, we'll do it. And at that moment, my ego had just been quashed. I had unexpected time on my hands. It was the perfect storm. And I agreed. I said, okay. And I showed up 2 days later on the phone with this woman and a CD recorder on the arm of the chair. And the guides dictated their first book, which was called I Am the Word. It took 2.5 weeks because I took 2 days off to go teach at NYU. And that's now the first of 13 books. The 12th was just published a couple of weeks ago, I guess. So this is what they do now. And I just show up now, and I've learned. And for somebody who had the worst writer's block of anybody I've ever known in my life, the fact that these things happen the way they do is astonishing. It's such a total pendulum swing, but it is about saying it's possible. If it's possible, it can happen. And then you claim it. That's how it works. But for me, it's all been about stepping out of the way, all the good stuff, really. What I try to control doesn't go so well.
Hmm. Well, when you first heard or had this experience with guides, was it a listening, a hearing? Was it,
Yeah.
so, how did that?
The first voice, which was the one that told me to get my act together, was a thought that interrupted all other thoughts and had
Okay.
its own resonant truth, and it couldn't be denied. When I channel, that's pretty much the same thing that occurs. It's like something comes through and clears out the chatter and goes boom. When
Mm.
I first started hearing clairaudiently in a different kind of context, which was when I was working with energy healing, what would happen was, the sort of static in my mind, or the incessant chatter was always there and would be suddenly interrupted or pierced by a thought that made no sense. So if I had my hand on somebody's chest and I heard the name Barbara, I learned to say, who's Barbara? And they'd say, my wife, my mother, my daughter. And as that kept getting confirmed, I began to refine the station. I think of myself as a radio, really. And
Hmm. Hmm.
when I'm channeling, I'm tuned into the station that the guides I work with dictate through. That's their station. And when I work with people one-on-one, I'm actually tuning into them. They're the coordinate, they're the radio station, and I'm often hearing them at a higher level, and they're explaining what they need. It's a form of mediumship or telepathy, I suppose. And when if you're having problems with somebody else, I can tune into that person, and I can often sort of broker conversations that are happening at a higher level. But it's really just turning the dial. When I first started, I used to think I had a tin can up to my ear on a string, and that somebody somewhere else was talking into the other can. And it was terrifying because I thought, what if nobody picks up the can and I'm left sitting in front of a room full of people who are expecting something? And one day the guides asked if they could merge, and since then I've not had to go anywhere for it. It's just there. It's just a flick of the dial, and it's acceptable. It's
Wow.
acceptable.
It's such a beautiful story.
It's mine. I'm finally trying to write it myself after, what was it now, 13 years of not doing that and letting the
Hmm.
guides do their books. And I still find telling my own story harder than just taking dictation. But in some ways, I was an unlikely candidate for all of this, and I know that.
Hmm.
Given where I came from and what I was about, and I don't know what my life would have been like without this, truthfully. But I really didn't think it would happen the way that it has. The last thing I ever thought would happen with it was that I would, be taking spoken dictation for books that don't require editing. It's just kind of nuts. Now the books are done in front of live audiences, all of them. So it's just videotaped, and we send the tapes off to be transcribed, and the guides say chapter one, and this is the end of the chapter, and this is the title of the book, and it's just sort of managed elegantly.
But in a way, like I've always said, I was born metaphysical. And when
Yeah.
I started taking metaphysical classes, I found it confusing because it's like, oh, you mean I got to do these steps and then this happened. But what's coming through me is it reminds me of when I was a up and coming minister, and I decided to do sell high end real estate. And
Uh-huh.
you just don't get to do that when you're in your 30s, because when somebody is working with multi-million dollar properties on Palm Beach Island, et cetera, they're looking for somebody that has lots of experience and has a book of business. But the guy wanted somebody that was totally didn't have filters and didn't know it all and all that. So in that way, it's like you were even more perfect for what you stand for, because you didn't have all that in the way. You didn't really have a position to argue, like some metaphysical people get into, yeah, but I know, or I'm more involved than that person, or well, wait a minute, I have 3 steps, you have 4. In a way you can see by design it is perfect they chose you,
Well, I mean, I,
right?
I expect so.
Mm-hmm.
I think I asked some of the right questions. I don't think I was looking to be known as somebody
Mm-hmm.
who did this. And, I had a friend who once said, Paul, you had enough public humiliation in your life that you don't care anymore. You're perfect for this because, and I stopped caring at a certain point whether people believed it or not.
Mm-hmm.
I don't, when I first started channeling publicly, and people would sit there and they'd, be like, yeah, right, and then I would, until I started reading for people, or the guides I work with bring through energy when they work that's very palpable. And when people could feel the energy, they would be startled by it because the guides would teach them to work with it. And all of those things helped. But I stopped caring whether or not they were getting it. I realized that wasn't my job. My job wasn't to convince anybody of the authenticity of this. And honestly, I'm somebody that doesn't always buy into some of what is called channeling these days. I think some of it's very well intentioned, and I think some of it's a little bit what's in the zeitgeist and what can we talk about today, which, my guides couldn't care less about, a celebrity culture. I mean, they
Mm-hmm.
couldn't care less, or, and anything that's sort of finger pointing and accusatory, I just tend to think is rather low level stuff. So, I just don't get it. It doesn't come through me, you
Sure.
know. So I just know, I just do what I do.
Well, I noticed that about you right away. Not that I'm the spokesperson of the universe, but because I have been a part of a spiritual community the majority of my life, and I meet, so many people from so many different walks of life, and I that stood out for me with you right away. Like, because I walked in and I went, where's this line going? And they went all the way down, all the way down to the street. And I said, well, where's the guy? Because I had never met you. Um, and they went, "Oh, he's right over there." And you were there like you were, waiting to place an order at a restaurant. I mean, like, I'm just here and I'm in this space in Ojai. And it really, it really stood out. It was a memory maker for me because, the height of, don't you know who I am? I mean, that it was so refreshing.
Uh,
It was so refreshing. Oh, get back there and put my name on that room and reserve it for me. And you were just like, just this calm presence of clarity and purpose. And I just want you to know that that impacted me. I'm sure it did other people.
I don't go
Because
to
it,
see other people work, so I don't know what other people
yeah.
do. I should probably ask for a cappuccino waiting for me when I get there.
Oh, well, it's I just know that so many people's lives were changed and they were all asking the ones I talked to, please let us know when you're coming back from Santa Barbara.
Thanks,
Well,
Adrian.
to Santa Barbara. Well, how did you wind up in Maui? Is there a story there?
Yeah, a big one. I mean, I was living in New York City, and I went to Costa Rica to channel a workshop, which I do every year. And this was in 2020, and New York City shut down for COVID while I was in Costa Rica, and I couldn't go home. And a friend of mine said, "Come to Maui," and I had no place to really go. And he found me a tiny house and a plane ticket, and I was on a plane there right after the retreat was over. And I stayed. I didn't leave the island for 2 years. I had never felt as welcomed by any place in my life. And it was kind of an amazing experience, and it was deeply healing for me on many, many, many levels. And I'd been tied to New York City because I had a job teaching college that was there, although I ran a graduate program at a small, hippie school out in Vermont at the same time. But I didn't know how to leave, and I wouldn't have. I'm a creature of habit. If I like a restaurant, I'll eat there every night for the rest of my life. I like what I know. And I live now in the rainforest with these two little dogs. I still don't know how to drive. I'm learning. It's been 3 years. I failed the test 3 or 4 times now, and I barely know how to cook. And I've actually never been happier in my life. So it was quite a miracle to be brought here, and it was funny, and it was all spirit. I had done a podcast with somebody in Brooklyn in a bar, and I didn't want to do it. I don't want to do a podcast in a bar. I don't want to channel in a bar. I can't do it. I try to get out of it, but I did it. And this guy, his name was Duncan Trussell, and he was very friendly. And his audience were the age of the college kids that I had been teaching, so I really liked them. That was really sweet because I miss teaching college still some days. And I got to Maui, and somebody had heard me on the podcast, and they were a client, and it turned out he was one of Ram Dass's caregivers and had been, and Ram Dass had just
Mm.
passed. And I found myself sort of welcomed into that community, which was unlikely again and perfectly lovely. And there's a lot more to the story, and there's a lot of synchronicities to it, but it's one of the few times in my life where I knew I was where I was supposed to be,
Mm.
and I stayed. And now I travel and I come back, but I'm coming home, so I don't know that I
Mhm.
ever had that experience of home before this.
Well, I love just the beauty of your surroundings. It's so obvious.
Yeah, it's a pretty
It's
place.
just really beautiful. And I see Lily, but where's the
Yeah.
other dog and what type of dog? Is it the same breed?
No, my mom crossed, I think it's a year ago today, actually, in New York, and this was her dog, Chance, who I
Okay.
had sent to me here. And Chance is, she's an old lady now. She's got to be at least 13, but
Mm.
she's having a bit of a second childhood. She's lived in tiny apartments with one door. And now she lets herself out one door to go to the bathroom, and then she doesn't remember which door she left, so she has to bark at another door. So if we get
Uh,
interrupted, it's a chance, forgot what door she came out of. But she's old, so she's probably asleep someplace. But she made
mm.
an appearance.
Well, I'm loving this conversation because it's evidence, and why I believe in doing podcasts is without a script, because my mother died last year.
Yeah,
So it's like the weaving of just sacred stories
I
are
agree.
they're so rich and so beautiful, because often I love what Mark Nepo says, that what we reach for may be different, but what makes us reach is the same. And we did the same thing when my wife's mother died. She had a blind poodle. And
Uh,
we said, if we can fit her on a plane, she's coming to live with
wow.
us. And those were some of the best 8 years of our lives, having that dog and her having a different environment. And she helped me see, you know, she might have been blind, but she helped me see so much better from a heart perspective. And it's amazing, the gifts and the medicine, that they bring us,
Mhm.
that's for sure. Um, I also see that in April, for those of you tuning in, Paul, do you do it every year, a retreat in Maui around
I
the
do.
spring or?
Yeah, I do. I mean,
Okay.
this is my home island now, so I used to travel everywhere, and it's a beautiful place, so I like to share it. But I do a lovely retreat on the other side of the island, and yeah, and it's my guides are teaching. They teach for about 5 days, and they attune everybody to the energies they work with, and get everybody working with the energy. And then there's a lot of opportunity for questions. So the retreats are fun, and I don't
Mm.
think they'll be channeling a book during that one, which is always a relief for me. I just did about 4 retreats in a row where they dictated the 13th book during those
Wow.
5 day retreats, and the whole thing was well happily done by the end of it. But that's exhausting. I mean, it's such a tightrope because I can't go back and change anything. So
Mm.
guides are doing a book, I'm listening so carefully, to make sure that I don't step on a word.
So, those of you that are tuning in, I just want to say that his retreats book really quick. He has one in Costa Rica. It's been booked for months, and that's this coming November. So, you want to go online to paulselig.com, Paul Selig, Seling dot
IG.
com,
Mhm.
IG. Exactly. Sorry about that. That's part of being live, right? Anyway, thank you for the catch, Paul, Selig, paulselig.com, and sign up now, because they won't last. Paul, how's it coming along there in Maui? Is it, because you had such the
With the fires
island?
last year. Yeah.
Yeah,
It was,
major.
I mean, there's a lot of change. It was devastating, to the island. It's still a wonderful place to come. Lahaina,
Hmm.
which was the town that was impacted, is being cleaned up still, and is on the mend, as I hear it. But I think people stayed away for a little bit, and now people come back. And
Hmm.
it's the most beautiful place I've ever been in my life. So I'm just happy to call it home, and the culture here is loving and accepting and kind. There really is aloha spirit here. It's something I'd never
Hmm.
real, but it's a real thing, and you
Hmm.
feel it in the wind.
I was there for a window of time, and I just truly, uh, it was so memorable of the aloha spirit, and people just stopping and, can I help you, or what do you need? Or it was just so really wonderful. Well, we're here in a time where we've had a lot of storms, climate change things. And you hear people like say, well, yeah, but back when I was a boy, this happened and that happened in 1965. But there's some of us feeling like things are happening more, and they're more dramatic. Um, do you have any thoughts or feelings about that?
In a larger sense, I do. In the first book, I Am the Word, the guide said, humanity is at a time of reckoning, and a reckoning is a facing of the self and all of one's creations. And that everything that's been created in fear or in greed or in, separation is going to need to be reclaimed in a higher way. And part of the process is having to see what we've been complicit to, and how we have been party to things that are around us, including, the climate, and including how we treat one another and how we claim separation. So I think that we're in a rapid process of change. I get that it continues, but I've been hearing this for years. The guides, it's funny, I suppose, if you were to track back through their books, and those, they were channeled over since, well, now over 14 years, you can really see, because they always talk about what's ahead and what's to come, in the book. And they're not doing fortune telling. I suppose it is prophecy in some kind of a way. But I remember before the election between Clinton and Trump, the guides said, everything that's been withheld is about to be revealed. There's a whole process. They said, imagine, you're living in an excavation site in your backyard, and things that were buried 5 years ago are coming up in 5,000 years ago, and it's going to look like a mess for some time. But these are things you have to deal with. And the purpose of these things is not to blame and shame. It's to see it, because you can't bring the light to it if you're pretending it's not there. And a lot of the things that I think we saw happen culturally were happening right after that, and in an ongoing way. So I think, what we're seeing all around us now is the product of this. And I think I have hope. The guides have said we're going to make it. They've said that. But I don't know that we get to go on as we have been. And I think it's a big call to change.
That's the same intuitive feeling I have. Yeah. And then being into the place of silence so long with COVID, right? And not being inundated with so many things, good, bad, or indifferent. We just weren't. I remember in St. Pete, it's like they wouldn't even allow us, the human law, to be out in a park. And I said, well, if I'm a minister and I'm meeting with a group of people, could I do that? And they went, nope, nobody's allowed anywhere. The beaches are blocked off. And so we went to a long dose of silent and quiet and retreat. And to me, I'm even more ultra sensitive than I already was. Because I feel like I feel things in Japan, I feel things in Nepal. It's just, and because of that space that we have in our humanity, and I find that a lot in my work, that there's this illusion of, oh, I'm spiritual, and I won't have to have feelings anymore, and I won't have to be human. But I found I'm more human. I feel more. I hurt more. I have greater joy, but I also have greater sorrow. And it's definitely, I don't find enough people tell you out there, yeah, it's very great, but it's not easy.
My experience as well.
But you were talking about driving a car, and I'm really enjoying talking to you today. And I like to never learned how to drive a car. And I never understood it until I worked with some of Rupert Sheldrake's work. And he gave an example of how in the very beginning, when they were inventing cars, that they had two cars in the same town in Pennsylvania. Have you ever heard that story?
No.
And he said invariably, only two cars in the whole town, and the two cars ran into each other.
Crazy. Yeah.
He said because they had not developed that morphogenetic field. And I thought, well, that's the reason I wrecked everything I drove, because my energy field and my aura or whatever, I felt too big in that tin can or whatever it was to adapt to that. It took me the longest time. So if that makes you feel any different, or it doesn't matter, but that was hard for me, learning how to drive and not run into things.
I just don't want to run into people, really.
Yes.
It's
Yeah.
That's only my only concern. You know, I was a New Yorker my whole life. You didn't need to
Sure.
drive.
Yeah.
And so grandiose when I was a child. And it's not that we had any money, because we really didn't, but I just decided I was going to have a chauffeur. I don't know where I got that from. I mean, you know, and then now I kind of do, because I have to pay people to get me to the store so I can get groceries, you know, but it's worked out. But I'm
Yeah.
actually looking forward to the freedom. I had a big car. I got a really big car for my first car, and it was so big, it was like driving a ship. And I
Yeah.
have my spatial relations are gone. I have no concept of size. I'll buy a
Hmm.
couch too small for the room, twice as big for the room. I just don't know. But I got a really tiny little car, so I'm a big man in a tiny car now. It's like Mr. Magoo. But I'm very happy. You know, I had a lesson this morning. I'm very happy puttering down the dirt road.
Oh, that's beautiful.
Yeah.
Do you do you recollect some of the books that you've written or that have been written through you?
Yeah, I mean, all of them. And at the same time, they all feel like one book, because the first 12 books, they say, are really a teaching, you know, that's
Mm.
common. And it's, you know, it was 4 trilogies. The first book I remember very well, because I didn't believe it was really happening. I was sitting there, I was taking the dictation and stacking the CDs up and then typing them up when I could, transcribing them myself. And I was sort of floored when at the end it really was a book. And I think the first book holds the DNA of the books that followed in many ways. You know, they were really telling us where they intended to take us. The book that just came out, A World Made New, is in some ways the bookend to all the other teachings. And it's quite a good book. And I only know this because I had to sit down and do the audio recording, which is really the first time I read them now. When I was transcribing them, I would read them because I had to listen to myself, which I just hated to do. But now I sit and, you know, when I sit and record the audiobooks, and that's the first time I actually go through the entire book, start to finish, and I see what the teaching was. But they really are taking us, I think, through a process of realization of who and what we truly are. You know, the guides say, I know who I am in truth, I know what I am in truth, I know how I serve in truth, which I guess goes to your idea of purpose. And, you know, the guides say how one serves is how one is most fully expressed as the divine self, or the true self, or the self that isn't having its way dictated by the edicts of the culture, or, you know, personal history. So,
Hmm. It's it's quite a journey you've been on.
and it's not over yet.
Mm-mm. No, of course not. Of course not. What do you feel from the books and how different your life is and how it looks? What do you feel you've learned
Well,
you've learned from it? How has it changed you?
you know, I used to hate this question, because I used to want to go, well, probably not enough, and I'm just the radio. And I used to say, you know, the radio doesn't always get to dance to the music, but it's not actually not true anymore. You know, my
Hmm.
experience of myself and my world, and I'm living a life I didn't know I could have, that I didn't think was possible to have. And I mean that mostly in just my experience of being, you know, as Paul in the
Hmm.
world. There are areas of my life where I still feel like I have much work to do, or there's much change to come. And, you know, when I'm in those phases and experiencing those things, it's a little more challenging. But I've had experiences, and really quite recently, of, I can't call it anything other than just being, which have been sort of phenomenal. You know, the guides I work with have begun speaking about God beyond the idea of God, or what we've inherited, and how we still claim the artifacts of history and our ideas of what God is. And they're moving us to an awareness and an agreement to what exists beyond even those ideas, which is really quite phenomenal. They talk about it as being in dialogue with God all the time in everything that you experience and see. I don't make choices based in fear, which was a big thing for me in much of my life. And the guides have said many times, the action of fear is to claim more fear. Every choice we make in fear gets us more of the same. And so that radically changed my life. And, you know, I have a sense of purpose and a sense of peace. And, you know, I am grateful for this. That's the best way I can describe it. If you ask me this tomorrow, I'd say something entirely different, you know,
Mm-hmm.
but based on my perspective on how I'm doing and how things seem. But it's remarkable. If I even look back 5 years ago, I would go, this is almost impossible. But I know the stuff works, which is the good news, you know. I know when the guides are speaking. You know, the woman who was the channel for A Course in Miracles was quoted as saying about her work, I don't believe it, but I know it's true.
Mm-hmm.
Kind of how I feel about a lot of this still.
Mm-hmm. Which even makes it more convincing. You know, when a person, you know, shares, well, really, I was an atheist, which I think a lot of atheists that I've met are sometimes much better positioned to talk about the divine than the people that argue their position about what the divine is. Because a lot of the energy is about defending a position that belonged to their parents or their grandparents or the great grandparents or their creed, or they just go, oh, this is the way it is. Well, how do you know it's the way it is? Because somebody said, but what is said in you? So when I was telling a group of people not long ago that I was at a wedding as a guest, and somebody sat down beside me and they said, oh, I understand your unity. And, you know, but I don't, you're probably not going to like this, but I'm an atheist. And I said, good for you. That's
Mhm.
awesome. And he looked at me and he said, okay, you're a minister and you just said that's awesome. I said, yeah, because actually you promote more about the what you don't believe in than most people ever mention when they claim to believe. So
Yeah.
I think that's awesome. And basically, if we talk for a long time, which we won't do tonight, but if we had, you would find we probably aren't too far different
Yeah.
from what we feel.
You know, I agree. You know, I didn't know this because, you know, my mother didn't talk a lot. And at the very end of her life, my babysitter from when I was a kid reached out to me on social media and said, I really want to see your mother. She had a big influence on me. And this babysitter and I went to visit my mother, who was, you know, quite old and sort of starting to lose some memory. And she told this sort of astonishing story. She'd been raised religious, which I had no idea, and had been, you know, abused and turned her back on the church. And I had no idea. And my father, which, you know, I mean, I knew this peripherally, but it wasn't until only a few years ago. I mean, I knew he was a German Jew and had gone to Europe, but I didn't know he was in the Kindertransport and was listed as a Holocaust survivor. I had no
No,
clue. So both of my parents came from places where there was a complete disenfranchisement from a God that could allow these things to happen.
of
And
course.
what I found myself, which I didn't realize, was that there was a tremendous longing for something which was source or God. Deep, deep, deep longing, and it was unnamed. And when
Hmm.
I was given permission in some odd way to have an experience of that, then nothing else was as I thought it was. I mean, to go from a world where there is no such thing as God into one in which perhaps there is like moving to another planet. It
Yeah,
really is, you know, and it still is for me some days.
yeah. I can totally see that. Totally get that. Well, I just, along with so many people, just have a great admiration for you. And, you know, like I said, with your sacred story, it's so profound, right? I mean, it's like with Suzanne Giesemann. I don't know if you've met her along the way, but she was in the military, an assistant to the number one officer, ranking officer in the U.S. She was in the plane with the Pentagon during 9/11. And because of tragedy, she went to Europe to learn from a medium what had happened to her family, to the death in her family. And the woman says, "Oh, you could do this." And so
Interesting.
she just so it's it's magic to people, because growing up through metaphysics and sometimes new age, it's like it gets tagged or labeled by, oh yeah, here's another person. They took one workshop and they're going to, give us this channeling magic, which,
Yeah.
I'm with you. And I heard what you said earlier and I couldn't agree with you more. It's like, please, you know, but that being said, because of who she was, totally military, totally left brain, it's like when you say Suzanne Gieseman's talking to angels now and she's telling you all this stuff, it really helps with the masses. And
It,
that's the point that I just want to personally thank you for, because you're coming from such a background and from such a place that people are hearing you in a way of believability rather than questioning. And thank you.
very welcome. Happy to be doing it. Thank you
Thank
for.
you. And thank you so much for being here today with me and being on Fire for Life. And I tell people this every time. I love Howard Thurman's statement that says, stop asking what the world needs and ask yourself what makes you come alive, because
Yeah.
that's what the world needs, is more people that are alive. And thank you for being that door that opens for people to be more alive. Everyone, I'm talking to Paul Selig. It's paulselig.com, SELIG.com. Go online. His books are there. His future events, everything that he's doing is on there that he wants you to know. Let's just be clear, not everything. Paul, in closing, is there any other thought or anything you'd like to add?
No, no, it's been a pleasure, really.
Hmm.
Genuine pleasure. Thank you for having me.
Yeah, it's been a pleasure. Thank you so much for being with us.